What's up everyone, Soldier First Class here in today's mission. We're going to be discussing today if there's too much Sephiroth in Final Fantasy VII Remake's Part 1. There's a lot of intel to go over, so stay tuned soldiers. It's time for our next mission. Before we begin, I'd like to thank my really good friend Cleef, who I discussed a lot of these concepts with. I'll leave a link in the description below where you can check out his channel and his video about the Shinra side of the argument. Cleef and I go way back to my old failed channel, and it was nice to work with him again, and I look forward to doing it more often in the future. One of the most iconic and fan-favorite villains in video game history, Sephiroth is taking on a much larger visual role than ever before. But the question is Sephiroth being shown too much? It's been a question that I've been asking myself, and I've seen a lot of concern with on forums, so I thought I'd address my thoughts on it in today's video. Part of Sephiroth's presence is actually how little presence he had in the original game. He wasn't shown at all in the original game until you were outside of Midgar. Sephiroth is more of a felt, not seen type of villain, but from the trailers, it seems like Sephiroth is everywhere. Granted, trailers are edited to give us something to talk about, but at the same time, he's had several scenes, and we don't know how many there will be in the final game. There are a few original game segments that line up with Sephiroth's appearances in the remake, so they make more sense than just a randomly injected scene. There's a segment in the original where Cloud, Barret, and Tifa are walking through the Sector 6 construction area, and Cloud gets a headache. He begins to hear a quote from Sephiroth talking about having the blood of the ancients. He then says in a text box the word Sephiroth. In the May State of Play trailer we got last year, we saw this scene play out, but with an actual visual representation of Sephiroth this time. For me, this appearance makes sense because you're seeing him through Cloud's vision, which would have been harder to show in the original. Then there's the E3 demo where Cloud goes to set the bomb on the core. Just before he plants it, Cloud has another headache, a small black feather floats to the ground, and you can hear a remade version of Birth of a God playing. This will likely be the first seed planted in letting you know that something is wrong with Cloud. This scene played out differently in the original, but the setup is almost exactly the same. There's one scene that's clearly been rearranged and even given its own dedicated room in the Shinra building this time. In the original, Jenova's chamber and the chamber holding Red 13 were just a few feet away from each other. This time, Cloud and the party are on a catwalk and encounter Sephiroth in front of Jenova's tank, which appears to be isolated. In the original, Cloud has a headache in front of her container and references them bringing her to the Shinra building and that she has a relationship to Sephiroth. To me, this is a remake of this exact scene, and they changed it to feature Sephiroth this time to really drive home the relationship between the two. One final scene that I want to talk about is the President's office, where we find President Shinra dead and Palmer tries to run away. In the original, we didn't see Sephiroth ourselves, but we did see the Masamune and Palmer telling us that it was Sephiroth. This is another change in the remake because we see Sephiroth appear in front of the party before disappearing in a cloud of smoke. If you look closely, you can catch the President's desk in this shot. So now that we've talked about scenes we can place with the original game, there's a scene from the E3 trailer that I just can't place. Cloud is in an alleyway by himself, and Sephiroth appears to him in front of a flaming building. They share some dialogue, and Sephiroth begins to mock him with a somewhat higher voice at the end. Cloud charges and attacks him, only for Sephiroth to disappear in a cloud of smoke again. The building behind Sephiroth is made to look like Nibelheim, which Cloud would recognize and cause him to become angry. It seems they want to take more advantage of the history between Cloud and Sephiroth this time around. Let's face it, if you found out the person that burned your village, killed your mother, and threatened your very existence was still alive, your story arc would be more driven than if that person wasn't still alive. Which is why I think they're really driving this relationship and showing bits and pieces of their history together. Not only has Sephiroth been featured in the remake trailers, but also in promotional material. He's gotten 2 different key arts, he's part of the remake trading card game decks, part of a special pre-order theme, and he's also the cover of the Steelbook for the First Class and Deluxe editions. A lot of the people's problems with all of these appearances stems from 2 things. 1, Sephiroth may lose some mystique if his presence is oversaturated, and 2, Midgar was used to set up Shinra as the big bad up until the President's death. This is where the story turns and the meat of the Sephiroth conflict begins. After this point, Sephiroth and Shinra become co-villains, with Shinra eventually becoming a subplot. However, with the voice acting, musical score, and the way Shinra is portrayed, I don't think Sephiroth is taking away from the impact Shinra has in the first part. If anything, I think they come off more evil than they did in the original. Hojo is obviously up to no good, and it's not like we didn't know about his drive for scientific power. President Shinra's facial expressions as the plate drops in the most recent trailer really sells that they have no redeeming qualities, well, other than Reeve of course. From a storytelling standpoint, Shinra and Sephiroth are very much intertwined. Sephiroth doesn't exist if Shinra and Hojo didn't make it happen, so for me, showing Sephiroth more in the Midgar segment really drives home that relationship too. I think it makes it more impactful when you get to Calm, and Cloud goes through the story of what happened to Sephiroth and why he became the main villain. So if after the plate was dropped you needed any more reason to hate Shinra, you get that reason when you realize what they've subjected innocent people to. I think they're also trying to mix different types of direction. We have humor, horror, psychological thriller, and internal and external conflict all in one story. Sephiroth fills the psychological thriller and conflict aspect, while Jenova fills that horror aspect. It really shows the dread and terror the characters feel when these two are around. There's also more to the development of the game than just this first part. Good storytelling across a multi-part saga requires well thought out setups and then callbacks to those setups. If any of you have watched Game of Thrones, they did this all the time, and it's one of the reasons why the show is one of the most successful shows in history. They would reference something in Season 1, and that reference wouldn't come to fruition until Season 3, for example. It makes you look back and say, wow, I didn't make the connection, or it can even make you think, I'm glad that finally happened because I've been waiting for it. Some people have pointed out that they feel certain events or pieces of information are talked about way too early, but in storytelling you need to set up certain things better or they feel like they came out of nowhere and you're just throwing things in because you can. Just because you say something doesn't mean that something has to immediately come to fruition. For example, Hojo references the hypothesis, which is likely talking about the reunion. This is called a setup, and there will be a callback to it later on in the story. It doesn't have to be in part 1 at all, as it could be in part 2 or even in possible part 3. Even from the very beginning of the original game, Cloud's headaches and Sephiroth's presence can be felt. We don't explicitly see or feel that until later in the game, but again, this is a remake told across multiple games. The question becomes, how will you satisfy old players while making sure new players are excited for future parts? For some, this will be the first time people are playing the story of Final Fantasy VII, and for others, this will be their first Final Fantasy game ever. And then for some, this will be the 100th time they've walked the streets of Midgar. They can still satisfy the need of the original fan while also keeping the new players guessing. Honestly, it's gotta be tough for them to balance new and old content, trying to satisfy the millions of fans that have already played the original. Setup and intrigue are the keys to keeping interest in future parts, and that means making connections and having different pacing. The story beats can remain the same across the remake, but certain events will be altered to fit into the multi-part saga properly. At this point, as long as they don't oversaturate the game with him, I think his mystique and power can still be shown properly. Like, I don't want Sephiroth popping up around every street corner or anything, but I think what I've seen so far has satisfied my want for the psychological thriller aspect of his character. I think it will make the Calm flashback even more impactful when we finally get to see the Nibelheim reactor incident through Cloud's retelling. For me, it just feels like setting up Sephiroth properly is the right move here. Overall, I don't see Sephiroth's appearances as too much right now, as long as those appearances are meaningful and not just because they can inject him like Nintendo can with Mario. Part of his charm is his initial mystique, but it's what we get into later in the story that really makes him the villain that we all know and love. If the seeds are planted properly, then the tree will bear the fruit we're anticipating. So I'll leave it up to you, soldiers. How do you feel about Sephiroth in Final Fantasy VII Remake's Part 1? Thanks for watching, and don't forget to Omni-slash that like button. Let me know in the comments section below how you feel about Sephiroth in Final Fantasy VII Remake's Part 1. Subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell to join the ranks of Soldier today. And for all the latest Final Fantasy VII Remake, news, rumors, and trailers, I'm Soldier First Class, and I'm on to the next mission. Later, guys.